Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Tobin. I am the founder of OzStocxs. And since we're at the start of this new channel, I just wanted to give you an overview of the Australian market, the Australian Securities Exchange, the ASX as it's known, for people who aren't that familiar with the ASX and how it kind of compares with the JSE. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Tobin. I'm the founder of OzStocxs. And just before we really get into looking at some of the individual stocks that are now open to South African investors or international investors via interactive brokers, or some South African investors may be using interactive brokers. I want to give a quick overview of the Australian market, the Australian Securities Exchange, or the ASX as it's more commonly known, just so we can compare and contrast the Australian market versus the South African market. So first things first, the ASX has just over 2,000 shares listed on. That compares with the JSE that has 331. So you're talking, 6 times larger in terms of the number of shares on the ASX versus the JSE. In terms of size, market capitalization of all the stocks, and the ASX is about $1.4 trillion in market cap, making about the 16th largest exchange in the world. The JSE, not too far behind, $833 billion, making it the 19th. And I guess the main reason for the difference here and why with 2,000 stocks versus 300-ish, why the difference isn't bigger is you've got some very large companies dominating the JSE, which are even large by international standards. So I'm thinking of Process here, Richemont, British American Tobacco. They are large companies by any standard, even globally. And the ASX, while it has 2,000 shares on there, and once you get outside the top 200, there's a very long tail of small to micro cap shares listed on there. Daily turnover is where we notice a big difference. Daily turnover on the ASX about 5.8 billion Australian a day. The JSE, what I can work out, is about 1.5 billion. Some of the reasons why the turnovers are so large: Australian retail investors are the most active and the most numerous in the world. So about every second Australian has a share trading account. That's even more than the US and the UK. Whereas share trading by retail investors is very limited in the South African setup, but has been greatly increased due to the easy equities offering in the last number of years. The other reason why daily turnover is so much larger is Australia, despite only having circa a population of about 25, 26 million, has the fourth largest pension fund market in the world. And the reason for that is RAs, or retirement annuities, provident funds, pensions, whatever you want to call them, became compulsory in Australia in the mid-90s. So every single employee, doesn't matter if you're working for the government in the public sector or if you're working for a company in the private sector, part of your salary automatically goes into an RA. And that has built up over the last 20 years, and that has significantly contributed to liquidity and flow within the Australian market. The ASX itself is listed on the exchange, much like the JSE company itself is listed on the JSE and is available to easy equity investors under the Easy Equities platform. One of the big differences you'll notice between Australia and the JSE and South Africa is The ASX saw 85 new IPOs in 2020. The JSE saw almost zero, and I would contend they actually saw zero if you take a brand new IPO. A lot of what the JSE classifies as IPOs are actually demergers, spin-offs from existing stocks that are listed. So you can think of NusPass spinning out Process, NusPass spinning out MultiChoice, things like that, where they're not really, I would say, a true IPO, or it's a brand new company coming to list on the exchange. Whereas the ASX has a plethora of those. And last year was about an average year for the ASX. They generally do between 50 and 100 IPOs, depending on the market. Some people say, the ASX is the newest exchange in the world, and he came into being in 1987. That's technically true, but on the other hand, its history actually goes back a lot further. So the ASX started due to a merger of all the individual state exchanges. So all the states in Australia used to have their own exchange. So there used to be the New South Wales Stock Exchange, the Victoria Stock Exchange, the Western Australia Stock Exchange. They all merged and formed the Australian Stock Exchange in 1987, which then merged with the Sydney Futures Exchange in the early 2000s to make now the Australian Securities Exchange. And the oldest state exchange at the time, when they all merged, was the Victorian Stock Exchange based in Melbourne, which started in 1861, just around the time of the Australian Gold Rush, which actually predates the JSE. The JSE would say it's been around since 1887, but some of the constituent exchanges that made up the ASX actually predate the JSE. So it's one way of looking at the history of the ASX. So for South African investors, now you have access to Australian shares via your Easy Equities account or your Interactive Brokers account if you have that. What are some of the shares that are available to you now that maybe wouldn't be available to you within the JSE currently? So you've got 340 shares and ETFs available on Easy Equities now, or everything if you're on Interactive Brokers. So Easy Equities is kind of the top 340 ETFs and shares from the ASX currently available on its platform. As I said, it gives you access to shares in sectors that are generally not widely available on the JSE. In the healthcare space, the JSE is predominantly dominated by either hospital groups, so Netcare, Mediclinic, or the insurance guys like Discovery, whereas there would be missing medical devices and medical products companies like CSL, who are like the world leaders in blood plasma, Cochlear, who do the ear implants. I'm sure a lot of us have seen the videos of kids getting those implanted and hearing for the first time, and ResMed, which is a world leader in the treatment of sleep apnea and COPD, or respiratory diseases, and medical equipment that goes along with them, which is not overly represented on the JSE. The other thing that's not really represented on the JSE is infrastructure. So Sydney Airport is listed on the JSE, as is Auckland Airport, Transurban, which is a large toll road operator, which would be, I guess, similar to Sanrail in South Africa, but was not accessible by South African investors. Sanrail is a state-owned entity. They own toll roads in Australia, but also in America. APA, they run the gas pipeline network across most of Australia, so another infrastructure play. Financial services companies such as Afterpay and the whole buy now, pay later space, which has taken the Australian market by storm in the last 2 or 3 years, which is a new form of credit. So you can buy but pay for something over 4 weeks. And Afterpay has been the leader in that space, I guess, revolutionizing. It kind of sits in between a debit card and a credit card. Very big in Australia now, branching out into America, and a whole load of other buy now, pay later competitors have listed on the ASX. That's something that's completely not available on the JSE. And even as a product in South Africa, you might see the MobiCred logo, which is probably the closest thing to an Afterpay in a South African context, but again, not available in the public markets. Technology shares is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the ASX. There are some technology shares, I guess, on the JSE, but in sectors where you have no access on the JSE, the ASX gives, I guess, differentiated access. Superloop, a large fiber network provider there on the infrastructure for connecting homes, businesses to the internet through their fiber network. Nearmap, so when you look at Google Maps and they shoot the overhead image, a lot of that is done by a company called Nearmap. They cover pretty much all of Australia and New Zealand. So if you look up Google Maps and you're looking for that overhead image, that's generally done by a company called Nearmap. Audnet, another specialist audiovisual company whose technology is used a lot in connecting up mics, cameras, sound systems at large concerts, sports stadiums, arenas, film sets. Again, not a company in the technology space that's available on the JSE. And easy equities are also giving access to a lot of ASX listed ETFs. Now, a lot of the ETFs on the JSE are kind of replicated in the Australian sense. So, global ETFs, technology ETFs, China ETFs, but a few ETFs that you won't get on the JSE, at least currently, which are available under the Easy Equities platform now. You can look at an ETF that completely focuses on listed infrastructure stocks globally. You can look at an ETF that looks at companies involved in cybersecurity globally on the ASX, and an ETF totally looking at the Japanese market on the ASX, which again is a country-specific ETF that you don't have access on the JSE, and the Japanese market nearly touching its highs for the last 20 or 30 years. I read recently. So Japan, an interesting Asia, maybe forgotten Asia space at the minute.